Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to be here today, and it's a great honor to have a chance to speak here about the things we are doing in the field of data protection. Did the German press really call me guardian of privacy? I didn't know that. It's strong commitment. It would be great if I can only sit and listen. And I think for all politicians, it would be a good lesson sometimes just to sit and listen. But I came to say something. And then, of course, I'll be happy to get your questions. So I will try not to be too long. I came here to say you something about our plans, because Andreas said that you came this time to Brussels, and I'm happy to have you here in Brussels, to be in the middle of the space where we are creating the rules. And that's our main challenge and also our main headache. Because for digital, the question of, even like from Hamlet, regulate or not to regulate, that's a big challenge and big headache. Because what we see what digital created and brought so many positive things. It's such a fantastic, free, democratic zone for exchanging of views and connecting people, organizing work, organizing private life, if you like. But at the same time, there are some worrying trends and risks which each smart regulator should try to filter out and address by legislation. And this is what we tried to do by general data protection regulation, which you know under the acronym of GDPR. When we were preparing GDPR for the full implementation, I discussed with many people from digital industry, not only with the lawyers, but also with the people who understand security and technologies as such. And I realized that it's the proper thing that technology and business is first and legislation second. Maybe it sounds strange, but I believe that we needed to give it some time to have some better idea of the development and then to come with the rules which have the ambition to be future-proof. And you know that till April this year, the regulation, the Data Protection Directive, originated from 1995, prehistoric time from the perspective of digital. So we had to come with the new rules and capture or filter out the risks. And we still have a lot of work ahead of us. Now it's 100 days since GDPR is in force. It's too short time to assess the real impact. But I would say that over the period of GDPR starting its function, many people in Europe realized that there is something happening to them, because almost all the people leave the trace in digital sphere. And almost all the people now realize that maybe they are watched, they are monitored, it could be dangerous for them, and that it's time to be more careful. And that's the philosophy of GDPR. We never promised the people in Europe that we will come with the regulation which will 100% protect their privacy. We need the people to cooperate. And that's why in GDPR, there is a very strong emphasis on the consent of people, consent which will be informed, where the people will understand to what they say yes to, and to be able also to use the rights, for instance, to ask for the shifting the data from one provider to another one, to ask for deletion of the information which they have in online sphere and so on. Here we have a lot of work ahead of us to explain to people what can happen to them and what they should do to be better protected. And each of us has a different feeling about own privacy. At the beginning, when I got this agenda to my portfolio, when my love affair with privacy started, I was not sensitive at all about my privacy. I was able to speak about my private things with everybody. You know, I'm a very, very open, extrovert person. And so when I read for the first time GDPR, which was more or less finished when I came, I was thinking, aren't we too paranoid? Isn't it too much? Heavyweight, robust legislation. Do we really have to require such things from also small and medium companies? Isn't it too big? And it was, by the way, typically Czech reaction. I'm from the Czech Republic, and when I ask in my country how people are sensitive about their privacy, I think still majority of people will tell you there are other serious things. Don't bother me with this is too artificial. When we were speaking about GDPR still coming in the future, I had many debates with people, and when I touched upon this personal feeling, I came to a conclusion that each of us has it different, and it also is connected with the culture, with the history. And now I will do a little bit brave, maybe uncareful generalization, but I have the feeling that the people who want to be more secure, who would like to have a strong head ruling their lives, who are able to cope with totality, they are less sensitive about their privacy. This is the conclusion I made. And if I ask the people, would you like to have a chip here, which will mean that you will lose your freedom, but you will be secure, I guess there will be a lot of people in Europe who will say, yes, give me the chip. We want it. So that's just the observation which I have after many debates, and I think that it's one of the most amazing and difficult things as well at the same time when we realize how this digital era is at one side influencing our lives, but also stemming and disclosing some of the layers in our societies. Coming back to GDPR. So now we are 100 days after 25th of May. More people realize that privacy matters, as I said before. We have some survey which says that 15% of EU citizens feel that they have complete control over their data, while 35% feel that they have no control at all, and around 50% believe that they have partial control. These are quite varying numbers, so I think that they will be changing in the future with GDPR hopefully properly functioning. Few days or few weeks before GDPR start, and it was mentioned here, the case of Cambridge Analytica appeared, and you remember we invited Mark Zuckerberg to come to Europe to explain to Europeans what they did to us, because according to some estimation, it affected more than 3 million Europeans. And he came and he said, Facebook will try to use, or will do it, will use GDPR as the global standard. And I thank to Mr. Zuckerberg for doing a good PR campaign for GDPR, because suddenly the people realized that there is something on it. Cambridge Analytica case is not yet finalized. The investigators are working on it, but from what we know now, this is a lesson, and this is something we have to react vis-à-vis elections in the EU. And that's why we are going next week to issue the recommendations for the member states how to make the European elections safer, how to decrease the risk of abuse of private data of voters, how to eliminate the risks of manipulation, because what we want in Europe is the free person who goes to the elections and express his free will, not the manipulated and easy to manipulate crowd, which will go through the brainwash in online, and then, of course, we can see what can happen then in the elections. So Cambridge Analytica problem, it was partly the problem of data protection, and here we say GDPR is a good solution. It should not happen again. And of course, there is this risk for the democratic processes, including the elections, where Europe has to act as well, and we will do our work. GDPR gives back control of personal data to the people. I spoke about it before. We would like the people to use their new rights. And of course, if they do not do it, investments, which we see on the side of the businesses, will be a kind of devaluated, because they should be balanced by the benefit for the people and satisfaction and trust of the clients and consumers of those companies. I met yesterday two very knowledgeable gentlemen who work in digital industry for years, and they spoke about something like data hygiene and cleaning the house, housekeeping. They said it's tough for the companies, especially the small ones, but now more and more say, yes, it was a useful exercise. We looked into our system and we got rid of the data which we do not need anymore. So there are some indications, including the reduction of spam, which say that GDPR is a good solution. But in GDPR, there is implemented another principle, and that's the proportionality and risk assessment. From the beginning, we said that we don't want from all the companies to take heavy measures or costly measures. If they do not process the data on everyday basis, they should make sure that their systems are protected against hacking, but they do not have to do much more. In some member states, this was not well understood. That's why there was that panic and so much criticism. I hope it will settle down. Also, there was a little bit, a lot of criticism on the future functioning of data protection authorities. And of course, they are independent. I cannot predict anything, but I can predict that or expect that they will do their job properly according to the law. But I said many times that I think that the DPAs, if I can use this acronym, that they will not be sanctioning machines. And they are not. As far as I know, the number of complaints doubled in some states from where we have the information. This is the figure. And they mainly focus on consultations, on advising, and this is not that sanctioning boom which many people were so hysterical about. GDPR is a game changer, and not only for Europe. I mentioned Mr. Zuckerberg and his plan to distribute the philosophy and rules of GDPR worldwide. This is a game changer in Europe, which affected almost all the institutions and companies, and I decided to do one thing which is not very usual one. I said 1 year after the start of GDPR, I need to get the first feedback of how it works. And we will do it. I will now start the analytical work. We will be collecting data from business world, using the cooperation of many roof bodies working in the world of digital business. I will ask the Fundamental Rights Agency in Vienna to do a survey how the people use their new rights, because protection of privacy is fundamental right, so they are well placed for that. We will do some other surveys seeking for obtaining a realistic picture and true and honest feedback, which will answer the question, was it necessary? Was it useful? Was it proportionate? Was it reasonably done? Is it obeyed, or are there any obstacles? We will invite businesses, we will invite many institutions. We will organize a big conference in June next year. After the elections, we will need to start doing again something normal. So after the elections, I think this will be the proper time. I will be still hopefully sitting on my chair and still being able to do something. Yeah, we are called lame ducks, so this lame duck Jourova will organize this conference. And I would really like to get a realistic picture, including the questions of money, because the company is now speaking about very high costs. And I'd like to get the answer on the question, are they costs or are they investments? Was it worth investing in changing their system, and be it software or organization, and communication with the clients? When I was defending GDPR, sometimes in April this year, I was under big pressure from everywhere, and the question was, isn't it too costly? Isn't it too expensive? Luxury? Isn't it risky to ask something like this from the small and medium enterprises who have many other things to do? And I said, well, GDPR is mainly focused on the IT sector. And I said that IT sector makes big money in Europe using EU people's data. And we know that data is money in this world. And so they should give something back to the people. They owe something to the people. And at this conference in June, I'd like to turn it upside down and ask or say, you invested in privacy of people, so it's coming back to you as the productive investment. The trust of people and security of their data is bringing some benefit and financial profit back to you as the company. This will be a big question, and I really hope to get the honest and true to answer. I mentioned that GDPR is a kind of global standard now. Europe has big ambitions. My ambition is to keep Privacy Shield alive, which I think enables quite good and easy way for the companies to transfer the data to the United States. It will depend on American side if we can continue Privacy Shield. But we started a new chapter with Japan. Today, the Commission adopted the adequacy decision with Japan, which means that we recognize the protection of data in Japan essentially equivalent to the protection we have in Europe, because as you know, we have the rule that the rights travel with the data. This must be guaranteed. So it was difficult time of the negotiations with Japan because their legal system and their legal culture is totally different from the European one. And we were not seeking for copy-paste system, but we were seeking for equivalence. So, but I think we got it, and we are on a good way. We started very well with Korea. We will start talks with Brazil, and also there is a promising development in India. I heard somebody speaking about Indian GDPR. And overall, we have more than 100 laws, or in 100 states of the world, they have the law similar to GDPR, just to give you the picture. So we will try to have this adequacy with other states as well. I spoke about the reality check next year. I didn't speak about other things which you maybe might want to hear. Of course, the big question, regulate or not to regulate, relates to the platforms, and it touches such a cardinal, horrible question of censorship. How far to go not to become the censors? Speaking about hate speech, for instance. How far to go not to become the censors in the field of fake news? I think that Europe chose the right way, and I was always a very strong protector of freedom of expression. I don't like censorship to become the standard in the EU. Maybe it's the fact that I lived half of my life in totalitarian regime. So my message is, let's be careful. And you know that for the illegal content, we were discussing it for a long time. We have the code of conduct related to hate speech. So we cover around 95% of the market now. The IT providers who are on board are deleting hate speech, which fulfills the definition of hate speech, which is prohibited by criminal law in the member states. We took the initiative in fake news, but lying is not illegal. Moreover, lying is sexy for people, no? Lie is usually, for many people, more attractive than gray truth. Moreover, in Europe, we have the new wave of external propaganda. I very well remember in my young times, which is a long time ago, but still I remember that the Soviet propaganda always said 100 times repeated lie becomes the truth. We have it here. This method got the highway in digital. How to fight against it? This is a big question, so you might know that we adopted the communication on fake news. My colleague Maria Gabriel is preparing the code of practice, but we will be very careful not to touch internet as such, because I think that internet should be the place where there will be different opinions, different trends and so on. The people must not get stuck in the algorithm bubbles. So it's another big topic for our debates with IT. But all in all, fake news, and some say Europe is weak, and I say I think Europe is proportionate. The last topic related to illegal content is terrorism, because we have many studies which say that the people get radicalized online and in prisons, online around 80–85%. And I think that for fighting against this horrible threat, we cannot rely on voluntary action from the digital sphere. We have to ask them to fulfill the obligation to delete the terrorist messages and terrorist content. So we will legislate on this. We decided that it will be an obligation to react immediately to the notifications from police and prosecutors, maybe also from Europol. We are still working on that. But it will be the game changer in our approach. But for a good reason, because terrorism is a big threat to the security of all our people, and we have to find the proper response. I know I speak too long, don't I? This used to be my trick when I didn't know much about my new work. I had a nicely written speech. I read it all slowly, and there was no space for the questions. But now I love the dialogue, and of course I would like to get your questions and hear your views. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, dear Commissioner Jourova, for your inspiring keynote. It raised many issues, and you started with the idea of Hamlet to regulate or not to regulate. So let me also start with this. Eric Schmidt, the former chairman of Google, several years ago said that the internet is the largest experiment of anarchy of all times. And if we look where we stand today with all these disinformation, hate speeches, interference with political decision-making and elections, I think the question is justified whether this experiment will end up with a good result or with devastating effects for our democracies. So the reaction in the member states is quite different. As you know, Germany, focusing on hate speech and defamatory content, introduced a law with a monster name Netzwerkdurchsetzungsgesetz. France is in the process of enacting similar code enabling courts to remove websites. We just read in the newspapers that in the UK, traditional media, broadcasters, etc., request more regulation on social networks. And the EU so far took the approach to say, let's stick with self-regulation. There's this code of practice to which all the big networks adhere. You sounded in what you told us right now, you sounded optimistic that this type of non-binding code of practice and voluntary self-restrictions will be sufficient in the long run. We heard Vivian Redding this morning. She said, I believe in self-regulation only if it has teeth. And if the teeth are not long enough, we have to come up with strict and binding regulation. So what is your expectation for, let's say, the next 3 years? Will we end up with binding regulation on disinformation on the internet?
I hope so, yeah. The technology doesn't work even here. It works. I do hope so. Of course, I'm maybe not such a good visionary to imagine, but I will tell you where I see the benefits of this voluntary arrangement. Coming back to your start, if it is productive anarchy, then it's fine. But naturally, I don't know, somebody said that 5% of people are building or constructing and 95% are destroying. So maybe this is also something which we now see in the free online world. I fear of over-regulation for digital. For instance, there was an idea, at some moment I was also thinking about it, that we should put an end to anonymity. Because when we speak about hate speech and the need for the police to react, being notified by IT, the police tell me, but we cannot find the perpetrator because of anonymity. So the first reaction would be, so let's regulate it. The people should not be anonymous. The people should express their ideas under their true names. And then I realize, is it the right thing to do?
Well, let's come to this issue of anonymity. Yes. I mean, we are just in the process of deciding in the parliament on the publisher's law. We have very important elections coming up next year. And what is the Commission's view on how can we prevent that, anonymous sources are trying to interfere with these political decisions? We had I read in the newspapers thousands of emails sent to the members of parliament in order to prevent this publisher's right being passed. And the elections next year will be, for Europe, very, very important. So I read in this newspaper this morning that you are going to propose, or Mr. Juncker will say something next week about what are the recommendations to the member states in order to prevent this interference with political decision-making. Can you share some insights already with us today?
Yes. I will only reply on voluntary action, to continue or not, and then coming back to this. The German law is a benchmark, maybe, for the future. But for the moment, the ministers from all the member states tell me, let's continue, this voluntary action could work and works according to our data. There are two downsides. We don't have all of them on board, and there is the issue of ownership. Because at this moment, I have a very strong feeling that we cannot get over the crisis which we have everywhere, not only in Europe, without the cooperation with the digital sector. I'm very open with you. I cannot imagine to say, okay, so we will have a conflict with you, and with you as well. They are too influential. And I think it's good to have cooperation rather than pushing them through the legislation. When we started this voluntary action, it was spring 2016. It was jungle in the EU. Everybody wanted to kill everybody. Remember, after the migration flow and after the terrorist attacks, the atmosphere was horrible. Then Germans, of course, reacted because their statistical figures were really horrifying. And I needed to do something now. Just imagine when you are a European regulator or legislator and you need to do something now. Yes? So, if I say...
It's a definition of now.
Yes, that's a philosophical...
The Brussels definition of now is a bit longer.
Metaphysic question. Yeah. I needed to do something in April 2016, so I did it. And they started immediately.
Which was good.
Yeah, so one could say, maybe Madame Reding has another, and many other people have another opinion, but yes...
No, I mean, I want, not to misunderstand me, I would welcome if we could stick with self-regulation, if this works in the long run, because there's always this small gap, where do we start taking influence, becoming a censor, and the last a media company would like is the Commission or national governments trying to distinguish between reliable sources and non-reliable sources, false news or right news, etc. So if it works...
Still it works.
It works.
And I hope it will work further on. When I was in Silicon Valley, I spoke to many managers of many companies. Only in one I heard, we are just the pipes, we are just the channels. And the dirt which flows through the pipes, it's not our business. It was a very exceptional opinion. All the others said, we find ourselves co-responsible, we are part of the current problems, and we have to be part of the solution. So it is the situation now, and I'm happy about the code of conduct.
Okay.
The other opinion, when I speak to the American people, some American philosopher, the lady, she upset me, but I have to be able to listen to all the opinions. She said, well, you have to fight against hate speech by positive speech. Yeah, of course, it was typically American approach. They have their First Amendment of the Constitution, which says freedom of expression without limits. But Europe has difficult history. Now some demons from the past are waking up. Yep. It lives in the society, and social media gives it a new impetus. So we have to react. On the elections, sorry.
Exactly.
We will issue the recommendation to the member states, addressed to the member states, to remind them how to apply GDPR in the elections. Also, it is the recommendation addressed to the political parties. And
this is the main focus on transparency of funding of political campaigns, of making clear who is behind what campaign.
All these things, in fact, what we are going to do, we say offline world is heavily regulated. The political campaigning in offline has very stringent rules. Online have no rules. And we see that more and more political campaigning is shifting to online. So we are asking the member states to take measures to introduce the rules for online political campaigning. Of course, one can immediately say that even if they are transparent, what we want, so we want the person who is online to see that he is reading political advertisement. This is the core of the proposal. But of course, there are a lot of manipulative news and opinions, and this is something which I'm convinced we have to keep free. with the risk that some people will be manipulated and go to elect wrong people with wrong solutions for all of us.
We were curious to see what that means in detail. Let me switch over to an existing piece of regulation, which you also mentioned, of course, the GDPR. You said that in Czech Republic, people thought that's a bit bureaucratic, and why are we doing that? I can just tell you from our company, what it meant is we had like 2,000 records of records. We had to establish more than 2,000 records of data processing. We had to enter into more than 600 agreements with service providers. We have, since 25th of May, more than 6,000 requests by private individuals who want information on the data, etc. So it's a huge workload, and all those which are a bit more directly responsible for profits and loss statements ask me, is it worth the effort? I mean, what has changed? Is the world a better world since we have GDPR? Today, are we less transparent in the internet than we were before? What are your expectations, let's say, for the medium term, the next 2-3 years? You said after 1 year you want to have a review. What are your expectations? Where will we stand, and where do we see concrete improvements? I mean, awareness is going up. People are also nerved by putting 10 consent buttons every day. But what would be your expectation where we stand in 1 year when you're doing the review?
I am aware of the huge work the companies had to do, and I respect very much and esteem the work and the responsibility which we saw in the business world. At the same time, I said that in GDPR we seeked for having the proportionate rules fit for purpose, based on risk assessment. Yeah, so I think that it will need some time also for the companies, for all of us, to understand what's the necessary work and necessary arrangement which has to be done to guarantee the purpose, which is the protection of private data of people, and what are the things which are not necessary or which proved not to be efficient. It will need more time.
Can we discuss some concrete questions to that? I mean, the GDPR is based on the fundamental principle that a processing of personal data is only permitted if we have a legitimate interest, or if the data subject which is concerned gives its express consent, which is the more important option of the two of them.
Or when the law allows you to.
Or when the law expressly allows it. So consent. Consent, there's a wonderful definition in the GDPR saying that consent is the free, informed, specific expression of the unambiguous expression of the data subject's wishes. So I mean, is it realistic to assume then when I get a new release of my operating system on my Apple phone, or if I'm asked to, consent to the new policy of privacy of Facebook or Google, I press consent. Does anybody in the room read the 40 pages of privacy policy? And those who read it, does anybody understand what it says in the room? Raise your hands, just it's not representative, but raise your hand. Anybody? No, nobody. So, I mean, for me, the important question is, can we assume that a consent is a consent? In particular, if I have no choice, there is no okay or pay mechanism. If I want to use Facebook, I have to consent, otherwise I can't use Facebook. Facebook allows for face recognition and all these things which are not necessary to run a social network. So what does that mean? If the consent is no consent, do we need control of the content of the privacy policies by the authorities in a much stricter way than it has been exercised so far?
There was a big discussion about consent, about the definition. What we wanted to find some way which will exclude the situation that science means consent, or non-action means consent.
Oh.
Yeah. And then when you want to avoid this, you have to define consent somehow. This was almost GDPR quite well. Yes, so it was almost the precise definition. But the consequent, the following article is that the information about the purpose, why the data is collected, why they want your data, must be clear, understandable, simple, not 40 pages. And I cannot help it. I have to look back to the scandal of Cambridge Analytica. It was the problem with the consent, because the people in app were asked, do you want to take part in an international survey? Mm-hmm. This is for scientific and research purpose.
It's for improvement of the product. What does that mean, improvement of the product? It's for making sending you targeted advertising.
The people were misled.
The people were misled, yeah. And if I come back to
But if they write them, do you want to take part in this because we want to address you political messages? Do you think that there would be 270 people, naive people, who would jump on it? So yeah. You know, there must be some
let me come to
normal communication.
To a similar question. I mean, I find not to be misunderstood, I find the GDPR, it's a wonderful, complex piece of legal art. And what I love is Article 5, because Article 5 spells out the fundamental principles. And the fundamental principles are accuracy, fairness, purpose limitation, data minimization, and storage limitation. Let's deal a bit with what that means. Take the example of storage limitations. We have in Germany, we have rules for telecommunication companies saying they have to delete communication data after 90 days. Did we ever hear of the Googles, Facebooks, or others delete voluntarily any of the data which they gather to profile us, to put shadow profiles of everybody? Shouldn't we go next step after you have done the evaluation of after 1 year and make that more concrete? What does storage limitation mean? Would it be thinkable to introduce, for example, the concept of every personal data has to be deleted after 90 days unless there is good reason for an exception? Would that be something to be thought over?
Look, it's general data protection regulation. It's quite general. We didn't want to prescribe too much.
Okay.
To make it more concrete, to do that was it was the series of the guidelines issued by the data protection authorities, which are not legally binding, but they try to make it concrete and make it clear. I don't know to what extent this is successful. This is not a criticism. I find it rather complicated. But here we still have the space to make the things more precise, to interpret, to explain. That's why I wanted to do this quick assessment in 1 year time, not to revise GDPR as such. I never meant it like that.
Okay.
But because there is the space, because I said we seek for proportionality, we should give us a chance to say, okay, so the 1 year of practice showed that maybe the storage principle is not clear. So let's work more on the explanation and using the feedback from practice, because I think that it's highly necessary that we will hear how it works in practice. Nobody could estimate all the...
So we will be permitted to contribute some practical experiences.
Sure.
Okay. I very much regret, actually, that we are highly regulated here, and there's a screen saying time's up. But I wanted to have...
Are we still on summertime here?
I have one final question, if you permit that. The exchange of data with US companies is of high importance for almost every European company. So there was a time where we could rely on something which was called safe harbor decision of the Commission. Then this was declared invalid, and then now the privacy shield is in place, and we just learned from the Parliament that the privacy shield is not working and does not grant adequate protection. And the Parliament asked in a formal motion to the Commission to suspend the privacy shield as from September 1, which is 4 days ago. I didn't read anything about suspension.
I haven't done it.
This is the one concerning the US. The second is that in March, an act was passed without great discussion in the US named Cloud Act. I thought it's dealing with cloud services, but Cloud Act stands for clarifying lawful overseas use of data. And what it really says is that the Attorney General in the US may compel US companies to provide and disclose communication data for national security purposes. This is, in my view, in clear conflict with Article 48 of the GDPR, saying that you may transfer to foreign authorities personal data only if this is based on a bilateral agreement or within the framework of mutual legal assistance treaties. So shall we stop now from tomorrow to use Amazon Web Services because we are in conflict with Article 48? Or what is done on the European community level to go beyond, get beyond this conflict?
I will tell you first on Privacy Shield. I share a lot of criticism which we have in the resolution of the Parliament and the Data Protection Authority's opinion. I don't share the view that we have to suspend it now, because I cannot help it. Privacy Shield or all the issue with the United States and the massive volume of data which is transferred, it has big economic impact. Yep. And I must see it. Of course, I am looking at privacy aspects, but I am also looking at economical aspects, and of course, as well, to security aspects. This is a triangle. And when we finalized the negotiations of Privacy Shield, I knew that there will be everybody shouting to me, because from all three angles, they will not be satisfied. But
that's a sign for a good compromise normally.
Oh, yes. So I guess it was a good compromise, but there is plenty of work to be done on the American side. Mr. Trump's administration
it's putting national security first and not data privacy.
Yes, that was my fear from the beginning, but the reality is not that bad. But they need to do several things. I don't want to go too long. If we get what we want, we will continue after October this year, because that's the time when we will issue the second annual report. And I said clearly to the Americans in the first report, there were concrete things we need to happen and improve. I am not ready to repeat the same things in the second report. It must be another story. And there is quite strong or intensive activity now. And by the way, I think that after Facebook scandal, also the American society is waking up. Yep. There is stronger and stronger pressure for better or more privacy. Yep. On Cloud Act, we are going to adopt a similar legislation on American side. We call it e-evidence, and this is a similar principle that upon the request or decision of the judge.
The judge. What is the difference? The US Cloud Act does not involve judges or courts. It's the Attorney General, meaning the administration, who can require disclosure. No? Some is shaking heads, then probably I take it back.
These are similar pieces of legislation. As for the principle and purpose, there are differences. But on American side, and I'm not here to defend Cloud Act, but yes, of course we read the law with concerns, but it is based on what we call necessity and proportionality when the law enforcement asks for the data.
And there will be a bilateral agreement then between the Commission and...
They have the so-called probable cause, and this is what we want, to have a bilateral agreement, which I would like to start negotiating after having the endorsement by the member states from October this year. And we want a similar thing. Of course, there will have to be a lot of trust and a lot of safeguards for the case when the request will not be legal or will create some problems with fundamental rights and so on. So, but we have to equip, coming back to Europe, law enforcement authorities with the possibility for quick action when they see that the terrorist hides his data or her data. I am a gender equality commissioner, so I have to be fair. It's too serious, of course, terrorism. So if the perpetrator hides the evidence in the cloud somewhere abroad, the prosecutor, the police has to have a quick way to ask for the data, for the evidence and act. This is, you know, the criminals have no borders, and the prosecutors and police, they are stuck in the national borders, and we cannot continue like that.
Ms. Commissioner, it was a great pleasure talking to you, and we wish you all good success in reconquering privacy and securing our security as well.
Thank you.
Many thanks.
Have a successful conference.
Thank you very much.